Ever since I was a little girl, I remember seeing my mom up in the middle of the night, studying and preparing for my brother's IEP meetings. I never understood why she would stay up so late, why she would do that to herself. Because I could see the bags growing under her eyes from lack of sleep, and I could see how she'd starve herself before each meeting from how anxious she was to the point she was afraid she would throw up. And I could see her break down from how emotionally and mentally exhausted she was. The exhaustion of constantly worrying if your kid is going to be okay without you, of constantly asking yourself, what will happen to my kid after I'm gone? It wasn't until I grew up that I realized she didn't have a choice. My brother has autism. This is a development disorder that impairs the ability to communicate and interact. Because of this, he cannot learn the way other kids do. My brother and 7.1 million others rely on the government to help them. Legislation like the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 entitles them to free, appropriate public education. However, my mom has learned that despite the government defining these supports, certain services are not provided. My mom has had to go out of her way to research workshops, laws, policies, anything that would force the district into action. But why was it that my mom had to go through all that extra stress just to get my brother the basic necessities he should already be given? I know my family isn't the only one going through this, so my goal for today and any other day when given the chance is to bring awareness to this injustice. Because the simple reality is that our nation's special education system does not work. There's a large assortment of reasons why these services are either not accessible to everybody or not good enough for those that do have access. Let's start with the lack of resources available. A district's funding depends on location. Whether you live in a big or small town influences funding. Small town citizens get the short end of the stick because they have less people, therefore less money going into schools. Additionally, a small population means less people requesting a provider in their city. With few funds and little need, a provider will often not be made available because it's not financially worth it. This lack of funding and resources plays into the lack of trained specialists and special education teachers. The Individual with Disabilities Education Act states that each student with special needs must have an individualized education plan. But with budget restrictions on specialists, there are just too many students and not enough case holders. How is each student supposed to get the attention they need when there aren't enough teachers or aides for each student to get a truly individualized plan? These shortages in staff affect the quality of meetings and how well parents are listened to. Now imagine this. You express the urgency for an interpreter, but you aren't given one. Or they give you one, but they don't take the time to make sure you understand the situations being discussed. As a parent, you trust the professionals, you trust they'll help, and you trust they know what they're doing. In these scenarios, you don't even know what's going on, but you're rushed to sign paperwork so the meeting can be wrapped up. This happens even when people can speak the same language because the process is so complicated and confusing. This serves as a barrier for parental involvement. Parents feel they can't really participate because the paperwork is taking priority over the person. Many school districts focus too much on the legalities of it all, and all these legalities means more paperwork for the teachers, administrators, counselors, and parents. But these district employees know how to read the paperwork. Parents don't, because it's specifically made to be tedious to the point that this isn't exclusively a matter of language anymore. It affects any parent who doesn't have a degree in law. The sad reality is that a lot of teachers avoid explaining the IEP document because they know how strict the requirements are and how time-consuming the process can be, and they think it's too much to go into during the meeting. So who's supposed to help the parents? Who's going to help them understand the paperwork? Who's going to help them convince the district to take those steps forward, to push teachers to put in their requests for needed accommodations? The obvious solution would be to hire a lawyer. Hire someone to advocate for you, somebody who has a degree in law and can interpret this paperwork for you. But not every parent can afford a lawyer. Most parents don't even have the time because they have work or they take care of kids, but they have to make time. A lot of parents quit their job so they can stay at home, support their kid, and do that research for the IEP. Parents are quitting jobs so they can interpret this paperwork by themselves. so they can push the district and push the teacher on behalf of their kid. In the end, they become an advocate because they have no one else. They have to go out of their way and out of town to look for workshops, courses, classes, because they don't just naturally know the special education laws. Most of them don't even know their rights, which means they don't know what's supposed to be handed to them in the first place. While they can't afford a lawyer, they also can't afford to leave their kid without services. So parents tirelessly and relentlessly fight. They fight because they know how important it is for their kid to make it to graduation. Getting a diploma affects where they end up in life. Leaving a kid without services or not providing them with the appropriate services causes them to fail. And when they're not at the same academic level as their peers, they're not given the same opportunities. Parents may have to fight for the opportunities that may allow them to be socially developed, even if academic development does not progress. And that's just if they make it out of high school. We are failing to support our students with special needs so much that most do not even make it to graduation, not because of their skills, but because of their behavior. It's been statistically proven by the U.S. Justice Department that in the 3 to 5 years after a person with disabilities graduates high school, 31% of them are arrested. According to childrendefense.org, in 2010, nearly 200,000 minors between ages 10 to 17 were arrested in California alone. That year, California spent 4 times more money on a prisoner than a student. The need and urge for these services is evident, which explains why parents have to go to such extremes. They have to hire lawyers, document everything, travel far for services, quit their job, learn a new language, basically turn into a teacher, a therapist, a lawyer, an advocate, and so much more for their own child. The parent builds their kid's entire case on their own. And it's very time-consuming and stressful, and they don't get paid for it. They don't have a choice. So what can we do about it? Something that would help immensely is making parental involvement easier. We could host continuous workshops for parents, teachers, administrators, counselors. Administrators and district personnel need to spread awareness and understanding of legislation to parents so that support is more accessible and meetings more effective. We also need to continue to bring in trained professionals to support our students. However, we could also reconsider when these services should be individual versus when they could be whole groups so that students receive the best possible services for the individual needs. Additionally, we could also spend money in far more beneficial ways. We could invest in sensory items, train or bring in counselors who know how to approach behavioral outbursts, or pay for new technology to support our students. But for this to happen, we need funding. There are solutions to these issues, but the first step is acknowledging that there is an issue in the first place. The second step should be adding more funding to special education. Maybe if we didn't spend 4 times more money on prisoners and on students, then our students with special needs would see graduation and not jail cells. I recognize that paperwork is important, but the way we do that paperwork needs to be improved. Because a parent shouldn't need a degree in law for their kid to get these basic necessities. After all, this isn't an individual issue for just one parent or even just one teacher. It is not even just a city issue or a county issue or even a state issue. It is a nationwide problem and we need to address it. Whether it be more funding or just better use of funding, these services should be more accessible. The people in charge need to realize that these students with different abilities are full of a lot of potential and could achieve great things, including a more productive life, if they just were exposed to the appropriate services. And all that starts with understanding these are people, not just paperwork.